Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to Mindful Matters. This is the podcast where we discuss the big issues faced by contemporary Muslims in today's society. My name is Bilal and Fateh, and today we've got a very exciting episode for you. So today we're going to dive deep into the world of addiction. Now, we don't want to have a conversation that revolves around the stigma of addiction because I think there's enough talk about that. We want to have a very deep analytical dive into the world of addiction and get into the nitty-gritty of it. We are not going to tell you how to live your life, and we are not going to tell you that drug usage in the one instance alone is able to ruin your life and you're going to jump off a building, because I think the scare tactics don't work. So, well, get ready for a very deep, non-judgmental analysis into the world of addiction. Now, with that introduction, I want to introduce our guest for today. Today we have with us Bilal Qudan. Bilal is a client service manager overlooking a large government contract and manages a staff north of, I think, 500 people, which is very impressive. He's also studied criminology and sociology at the Western Sydney University. And I believe, Bilal, you grew up in Campbelltown, which is, I guess it makes you a solid authority on what the cultural norm is in Sydney.
Yep.
So with that, I welcome you, Bilal. Welcome to Mindful Matters podcast.
Assalamu alaikum, Taslim. How are you?
Wa alaikum assalam. I'm good.
That's good. That's good.
Okay, so we're going to dive deep into addiction today.
Yep.
But before we do that, I guess we need to define what addiction is.
Well, researching a couple of definitions, I found the perfect fit for it. Addiction is a brain disorder characterized by compulsive engagement in rewarding stimuli despite adverse consequences.
Okay, yeah, so the key point I want our audience to note here is that a lot of people cannot really differentiate the difference between really liking something and being addicted to something. So with that definition, what do you think is the difference between really liking something and actually being addicted to something?
Well, the main point to take out from that definition is adverse consequences.
Okay, yeah, I guess that's a good start because, you can be addicted to working out and it might not have adverse consequences, might
Correct.
actually kind of be healthy for you.
Yeah.
And you can be addicted to chocolate, which can obviously, have a lot of adverse consequences. So now that we have a bit of a ballpark definition of what addiction is, let's get into, because before this podcast we were having a conversation and we made a bit of a list about what kinds of addictions people can get into.
Yep.
There are a lot of addictions that people don't even know that they might have. So can you give us a bit of a, overview of the two major types of addictions that we looked at?
Well, there's substances addiction.
Yeah.
So that is your drugs, steroids, smoking,
You can get addicted to steroids.
Of course, of course.
Yeah.
The more you want to go to the gym and build muscle,
Yeah.
the more you want those quick gains.
Yeah, clearly I'm not addicted to steroids, but okay. Yeah.
You also have food-related addictions like
Yeah.
chocolate,
Yeah.
overeating chocolate, and you also have alcohol.
Yeah.
Alcohol, as you know, is
Yeah.
alcoholism.
So these are our big substance addictions that everyone
Correct.
calls addiction.
Yep.
There's another category as well.
Yes, there's behavioral addiction.
Okay.
So that has your gaming, pornography, gambling, social media, TV, and
Yeah.
also shopping, funny enough.
Yeah, crazy. I think that's why people coined the term shopaholic.
Correct.
Because it can turn into an addiction whereby you make yourself feel better.
Yep.
I think that's the key point we arrived at anyway, that addiction generally has a larger spectrum than what most people realize.
Yep.
And, there's substances and behavioral addictions that aren't recognized by the public or by medical authorities or the government as well. For example, being addicted to getting plastic surgery. So the environment around you can get you addicted to going again and again to getting, certain procedures done that might not be the best for you. Or, pain medications and, even good activities can have people addicted to them. For example, too much working out where you ignore your family life, or too much spirituality. And I remember you were telling me a hadith in regards to that. Do you want to share that?
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah.
Well, the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam,
Sallallahu
he said, "I fast, but not every day. I pray at night, but not all night. And I'm a married man." He also said, "Whoever does not wish to follow my way, he is not from me." He shows basically that excessiveness is bad and that you should be moderate.
Okay, that's interesting because we were discussing this before as well, that Islam as a religion gives us moderation as its cornerstone.
Correct.
Any type of extremism, whether it's in a good thing or a bad thing, can lead to adverse consequences in addiction, which I think a lot of people don't realize that.
Yep.
Another main point that we discussed before was the fact that recent research has shown that it's not really the substances that get you addicted to, like get you into an addictive pattern. Because, for example, in hospitals, you've got old people that go in and get hip replacements,
Yep.
and they're given drugs that are 6 to 7 times more powerful than street crack cocaine and
Yep.
heroin. But they don't get addicted to it. You don't see grandmothers coming out with a hip replacement saying, I need more endones and heroin and stuff. So I think we had a very productive conversation around that. It's not really the substance that gets you addicted. I think that's what the recent research shows.
Yep.
And that was also proven in the Vietnam War, whereby 80 to 90% of the soldiers were given heroin to deal with the atrocities of war. And when they came back to America, 95% of them just got off of drugs without any issues. So I think the taboo adds to this. And, you know, what do you say about that?
Well, that's correct. It's more like the environment factor that
Yeah.
puts you in. So it's not the substance, it's what you've created that substance with.
So what is in the environment that can get someone addicted to anything?
Well, creating habits with
Okay.
that substance
Yeah.
in a certain environment, being in a certain group, being in a certain, staying at home all the time, usually having that pattern there with you,
Yeah.
and just establishing that, environment every single day.
And you mentioned before lack of meaning in someone's life
Yep.
can lead to addictive behaviors, because how are you going to fill up that hole? And that hole is going to cause pain in your life, which then you need to subsidize with some sort of a substance or a behavior that
Yep.
rewards you. Yeah. So now we want to look at addiction today. I think we agreed before, from 5 different angles. Can you tell us what those angles are that we're going to be using to look at the problem of addiction, the addiction dilemma?
Yep. Well, there is philosophical, there's psychological.
Yeah. So philosophical is like the philosophy of addiction, yeah?
Correct. Psychological, which is your disorders related to addiction.
Mhm.
There's also physiological, which is the processes related to addiction.
Yeah.
And there's also spiritual and social effects as well.
Okay. So we are making sure that we are not looking at the problem of addiction through the lens of good and bad.
Correct.
I think that's the key point here in our discussion, which we agreed to, because the angle whereby you only look at good and bad deters addicts from joining that conversation, because
Yep.
they are instantly labeled as bad. So what we're doing is we're using these 5 angles, and we're going to look at addiction from a different perspective. So philosophy of addiction. I know we spoke a lot about it,
Yep.
and we've spoken about how the stigma is built around addiction. I think it's mainly due to the Socratic view of viewing addiction. So what that means is people view addiction as something that results out of a unified way of thinking. So I'll elaborate that. Basically, what that means is at some point you end up saying that the person that's addicted has made that choice. Thereby, you put a moral statement on top of that, saying that they're either good or bad or of weak character. That is why they're doing that, because that is what they want to do. And then we were looking through it, and we realized that latest research has actually shown that the human mind or the human self is not really a unified entity.
No, it's not.
Yeah, exactly. So there's processes and systems in there that guide your decisions. And there is, for example, your reptilian brain, which is way older than your prefrontal cortex. So your reptilian brain can actually overpower your prefrontal cortex because it is more dominant and it's been there longer. That's the part of your brain that actually tells you need to eat, you need to reproduce, safety. So the fight or flight response that's activated by the reptilian part of the brain.
Yep.
And then you have the prefrontal cortex, which is whereby you can determine things by logic and reasoning. Now, whatever you feed becomes what dominates.
Correct.
So I think in that way, it's very important to look at the philosophy of addiction.
Yep.
Because a lot of people miss that part, and then they go straight into calling people good or bad, and then that just isolates the victims.
Well, first you have to understand what's actually causing it.
Yeah.
Like you said, if it's not If it's not their choice, if it's something else that's taken over them,
Yeah.
then that's what you got to analyze. What's taken over them?
So I remember you said something exciting about that before.
Yep.
In terms of ancient mythology,
Yep.
I think they were on the spot. They figured out the secret to it, and then they came up with a line that you mentioned. So what was that line? You know, what does it feel like to be battling with addiction?
It's like a demon inside of you.
Yeah,
You're at war with the demon.
Yeah.
You're choosing between positive and negative to
Yeah.
say so.
Yeah. So, you know, the ancients actually had it right.
Correct.
Yeah.
Along the line, we messed it up a bit, but now we're trying to get back to it.
Exactly. It ends up that whatever angle we look at it from, the picture of you fighting with a demon is the best representation of how one fights with an addiction. And
Correct.
I think it has deep messages for us. Okay, so moving on from the philosophy, let's get into a bit about the psychology of addiction.
Yep.
So did you come across a definition? How can we narrow it down? What do psychologists say addiction is?
Well, the oldest definition that we have from a psychologist's perspective states that an addict lacks self-control. The addict finds it hard to abstain from the addiction.
Mm-hmm.
He cannot resist the temptation. The addict loses control over his actions. It is viewed that an addict battles with their addiction and wanting absences and gain control over their actions.
Yeah. Doesn't that feel like it's just another way of saying fighting with a demon?
Of course.
Because at the end, I see how it says, you know, there's a battle going on.
Yep.
But I think we also agree that this is a very limited definition of addiction. Because again, it is showing the addict as someone that's a weak person losing a battle.
Yep.
And it can get a lot more complex than that, especially psychologically.
It leads to anxiety.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
As you know.
how can you elaborate on that?
Well, reducing anxiety chemically will reduce your ability to to naturally manage anxiety later on.
Okay, so if you take chemicals to reduce your anxiety, then your baseline anxiety levels will actually rise. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. And you can't deal with that situation with your natural faculties.
So that's counterproductive.
Correct.
Because, yeah, and I assume that will lead into a cycle which is pretty vicious.
Yes, that is it.
And is it the same with depression in terms of psychological depression?
Well, if you're not dealing with the problem, you're going to get depressed.
Okay. And I guess, you know, you said earlier, fake happiness will take away your real happiness.
That is true. That is
Yeah,
true.
so-
That is true.
So if you get into substances to provide you with happiness or behaviors that will provide you with fulfillment, you will actually lose all real fulfillment.
It just depends what sort of happiness you were searching for.
True. Searching for is a good metaphor for it, because that brings us to the next angle that we're going to look at, which is
Spirituality.
exactly the spirituality of addiction.
Yep.
From what I understand, you know, you've recently grown into a more spiritual person than what you were before, and I guess that goes for all of us as we grow up.
Yep.
But maybe you more than others, because. So, what did you observe in terms of spirituality? You know, around.
Addiction?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it traps you in your natural state. And the reason why it does that is that it's sort of, it governs your natural urges. You cannot reach or progress to a spiritual state if you're an addict.
So by the natural state, you mean the nafs amara?
The nafs al-amara, that's correct. The nafs that incites to evil.
Okay, yeah.
Because it governs all your natural urges, how are you going to regulate them?
Yeah, true. So I guess if you use something that strengthens your natural responses, then your natural response system will become dominant over your spiritual response system. So, you know, the physiology will basically take over at that point.
That's
Yeah.
That's
Okay,
right.
so I remember before we were talking about our good friend Mr. X. So
Yes,
we're
yes.
not going to mention the name here because obviously we don't want to take names. But we actually have a good story in our life where we've seen our friend, let's just call him Mr. X.
Mr. X?
Yeah. He used to be a great guy. He used to go to the mosque with us.
It was
And
very good,
yeah. This guy, I remember because we went to his house, he had pretty strict parents. The problem with
Tyrannical, yeah.
Yeah, tyrannical is the word, because when he spoke about addiction, they wouldn't talk to him about it. When he wanted to bring up the issue of drugs or, you know, pornography, it was certainly labeled as taboo.
Well, that's the thing. Everyone's eager to actually understand what's wrong with it.
Yeah. So, but when you don't teach them, what happened with that mate?
Rebel.
Tell us a bit more about what happened with him, because it's an interesting story.
Well, he became very distant
Yeah.
at the start. And then I came to know that he was on weed.
Yeah.
You know, went to a wrong crowd, stayed with them,
Mm.
totally neglected his positive duties that he was doing before, going to the mosque, he's doing his charitable deeds. So he basically neglected that, and he's just stuck in that certain group, distant from anyone else, trapped.
Does he still believe in a God?
I don't think he does no more. What I've heard last time was that he actually left his deen and he's actually moved to atheism.
Okay.
And you can
the
see
reason
that-
I asked that
Yeah.
is because a lot of people akin addiction to idol worshipping.
Yes. Yes, I agree with that 100%.
Yeah.
The reason why, if you're putting all your time and effort in actually getting your addiction, then what are you putting into your actual worship to God?
Yeah, exactly. Because what is worship?
Correct.
Yeah. Worship is when you work towards the highest aim in your life, or the things you do towards
Yeah.
the highest aim in your life. That is the thing you worship, essentially.
Correct.
So if all your time is being spent into procuring your...
Not just time, money.
Yeah, time, money,
Yeah.
attention, then essentially what you're doing is you're worshipping the addiction that you have. And it doesn't always have to be a substance. It can also be a behavior. If it's just gaming all the time or internet all the time.
It could be money, great too. You can be
Yeah.
addicted to that.
Yeah.
And
So
that could be your God.
And speaking spiritually, that's pretty much the worst thing you can do.
That's it, shirk.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now we're not giving out fatwas here. We just drawing parallels, so that we can get a better understanding around the topic.
Yep.
So now, it isn't just psychology and spirituality that suffers.
No.
The big thing that we need to discuss is the physiology of
Yes.
addiction, because what happens is, what people don't realize is that this is not just a psychological phenomena. There's actually physiology involved in this. There's chemicals in your brain that reinforce those behaviors. So we spoke about dopamine, I remember, and how if you use something, or even if you have a certain behavior whereby you repeat the same pattern, you can end up with a deficiency of dopamine receptors in your brain, which obviously then lead you to some sort of anxiety and also general level of lack of motivation.
Yep.
Because you're not going to get the same dopamine shot in your brain to do normal things. So,
Correct.
and I remember X went away from his family as well because he couldn't really get motivated to go see his parents, because it's just easier to sit on your couch and have weed or whatever.
He was chasing the dopamine.
Yeah,
so to
exactly.
say.
Yeah. So
And he wanted to be around those people who are also chasing the dopamine as well.
yeah. And there was a study that I read that one-time MDMA usage can actually drop your baseline serotonin levels, which can affect your day-to-day happiness. And it actually takes 6 to 8 months to be able to recover from that. So basically taking it once will make you less happier over the next course of the next month.
So is it really worth it?
Yeah, exactly. That's what people have to decide. So now we've spoken a bit about the physiology. We've spoken a bit about the spirituality, the psychology, the philosophy of addiction.
Yep.
Let's get on to the sociology, since you have actually studied sociology. And you have, all these ample examples around you, probably because Campbelltown. But okay, so what do you want to say about the sociology of addiction? How does it affect your social life? Because there's another stigma, there's another stereotypical concept around that drug users cannot do anything, or drug users just sit on their couch all day, or they're just completely wasted. But we've both known some high-functioning drug users.
Yep.
So can you put some light on the sociology of addiction? What does it do to your society?
Well, the sociology of it makes a person, for example, isolated, abandoned society altogether. That's for some. But your high-functioning addicts can still go, do their career, whatnot, but are not motivated to be the best that they can be.
Exactly. That's the point we came across, that you might actually still be able to keep a job. But who knows, if you weren't an addict to whatever your addiction is, you might have progressed at that job a lot quicker than what you did now. And
it's putting much focus into your career than your addiction.
Absolutely. Yeah. And your circle.
Yep.
So the friends you've seen that have been on certain addictions, whatever it is, what usually happens to their social circles?
They leave interest in their family. Their regular friends who were giving them positive guidance, they leave them because they want to stay in a group that, is accepting, to their addiction and also is able to, be in that sort of environment and do that sort of addiction with that person.
So you go into more risky environments, and then you end up with, places where you could possibly get abused in certain ways. And, because these situations tend to go from safe to dangerous, especially when it comes to substance usage and or gambling in that sense. Yeah. I don't think it happens with shopping, but with shopping, you're going to end up broke.
Correct.
Yeah, which is going to cause a fight with your family. So I guess that's just as bad.
Well, gambling. Even when I used to work as security at a nightclub, I used to see it at the start. I used to think people were there to actually win money.
Yeah.
It gets to a point where you see them putting a lot of money in and you're like, what's the point? You're throwing it all away than what you're winning.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you told me about a guy that actually, I think he won like $40, and the next time he put in $80 because you're all about the chase then. You're not even about the reward.
That's what you want. You're not looking for the win.
Yeah.
It gets to a point where you're not looking for the win. You're looking for that chase.
And that's not a value judgment because, like we said, there's physiological reasons why that happened.
Yep.
Dopamine starts governing you and you're stuck in your natural state, your nafs amara.
Correct.
So
It also brings us to the positive and negative side of things.
Yeah, that's an interesting one.
Yeah.
Because we came across the whole idea. We didn't come across this. We just, obviously, this is a very ancient idea. But the idea that everything that exists has a certain amount of pleasure and pain attached to it.
That is correct.
Yeah. So, for example, Wheat Bix has the pleasure of having 20, 30 grams of carbs in it, but also the pain of having 15, 10 grams of fiber in it.
Yep.
And if you keep that balance as close as you can to how it is supposed to be, which essentially means natural, then you are not going to have to pay the price later. Yeah, because I think we discussed if you isolate the pleasure,
you get the pain later.
Exactly. And if you isolate the pain,
you get the pleasure later.
Exactly. And isolating the pain is sort of like doing a good deed even when you don't feel like doing it, or sacrifice.
That's
exactly.
Correct.
So addiction will actually take you away from the ability to sacrifice.
Because all you want is that pleasure.
Exactly. You get addicted to isolating the pleasure. So, for example, people that eat a lot of chocolate only want the sugar. They don't want the fiber. Now, nature did not intend it to be like that, and that causes obesity. It's the same with pornography. With pornography, if you have a pornography addiction, all you want is the supposed pleasure of looking at novel women or whatever you're looking at.
Yep.
And it doesn't actually have the pain of having a whole societal structure around it, which is a marriage and a wife and a proper social interaction. So you can just go through as much pleasure as you want, and what that does is it hooks you on and you can't get out of it.
It's getting that quick hit without working for it.
Exactly, yeah. So I think because we don't want to tell you what exactly to do and what's good and what's bad, the sort of conclusion that we came around is that the closest you stay towards how the natural balance of things is, the further you will be from addiction. Because naturally, the things that are found in our natural environments will not actually get you addicted. So now we've discussed a bit about, how physical conditions have a positive and negative balance in your life, and how the equilibrium is something that always balances out throughout the course of one's life. How we discussed, you can go to the gym, there's pain involved, and then you end up with a decent physique, which is the pleasure at the end. So it all balances out. How does that relate to one's spirituality?
Well, it is the same. It's pleasure and pain. But in spirituality, it is more of your state of consciousness.
Yeah, so it brings us back to the 3 states like you were saying.
Correct. You have your stage 1, which is the state that incites to evil, which is your nafs al-amara.
Yeah.
You also have your middle state, which is your self-working state, the nafs al-lawana, where you're always trying to fight back through your temptations and with your demon.
Yeah.
And then once you do, you overcome that sort of temptation, that sort of fight with the demon. Then you'll get to your last state, which is your nafs al-mutamina, which is your soul at rest.
So I think you can akin that again towards taming the beast within
It is because you've actually fought with the demon and you've overcome that. You've got into a state where now your soul is at rest, that demon is finished, you've tamed it.
Yeah, and I guess taming anything would involve a lot of pain at the start.
Well, you got to work hard to get that pleasure and reward later they would want. You want your soul to be at rest, you got to work for it, and that's spirituality.
Absolutely, yeah. And another advice that I want to give our audience here is that you don't have to go from in a state where you are having an addiction to suddenly going to a state where you're going to find that pleasure of achieving, no addiction. Because
well, you can't. It's progressive overload.
exactly, and there's a state in the middle, the nafs al-lawaima, or the moral state, you can say, where sometimes you will falter and you will have to fall back into those cycles.
Well, just imagine you were in that negative state. You've done all those bad habits, and the next day you automatically drop all your habits, drop everything you're gonna do. Automatically, you're gonna be in the nafs al-mutmainna. No,
Yeah, I wish, but it doesn't happen.
it
like
doesn't
that.
happen.
Yeah.
And you need to work towards that, or you won't become stronger. You won't progress.
Yeah, and for our audience who want to learn more about the 3 states of the soul, and you can look at it from a point of view of addiction as well and spirituality, I highly recommend The Philosophy of Teachings of Islam by Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, alayhi salatu wasalam, the Promised Messiah. I think that's a very extensive explanation of these 3 states, gives us a good overview. So in terms of the nafs mutmaina, you end up with the pleasure at the end.
Yep.
But like we discussed, you have to go through a lot of fighting with the beast or the demon, as you say, or as the myths say, within you.
Yep.
Do we know how much pain we're going to have to go through?
No, but just look forward to the reward. Don't worry about the pain. Look forward to the reward that's going to come after.
That's true, because I think that's a very good point, because a lot of people, when they're in that state, they can't really fathom the pleasure that they would land at if they can go through that spiritual exercise.
Well, you need that pain because that pain gives you meaning.
Yeah.
Without that pain, what meaning do you have?
Absolutely.
You're
I
not,
don't think...
you're not working towards anything.
Yeah. Okay, so we've, mashallah, discussed a lot in the course of this podcast. So I'll just sum it up for our viewers here. There's basically 5 different aspects that we looked at, and we went through the philosophical,
Correct.
what people think about addiction. Then we spoke about the psychological, how you can actually land yourself with some psychological ailments because of your addiction. And the physiological responses, so how the chemicals in your body are actually related and reinforcing your addictive behavior. And then you gave us a very good explanation about how the spiritual outcomes revolve around addiction. If you have addiction, your spirituality is naturally going to be on a declining state.
Yep.
And then we spoke about some of the social effects as well, and the pain and pleasure attached to addiction. So I think we went through a lot there, but I want to summarize all of this for our viewers and basically just reach out to them in a way where we can explain to them that we understand that these issues are not simple, straightforward moral lapses, and that you're not addicted to something simply because you once did something wrong and now we can't talk to you again, or you can't talk to us or anyone. So because isolating yourself is one of the biggest reasons why you are addicted. So to that end, I really want to encourage our viewers, if anyone is battling with addiction, we really understand that it can be quite complex, and we would really, really appreciate if you can reach out to us, which, by the way, you can do completely anonymously to our Ask FM platform. So that is askfm/mindful matters, where you can drop a question to our experts and they will answer your question empathetically with complete anonymity. So you can get the information without actually telling us who you are.
Be not afraid to ask.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the key, because most people are afraid to ask. And again, I would like for you to revisit these consequences of addiction that we've discussed, because I remember you said before, the biggest consequence of sin is that it makes you forget its consequences.
Yep.
So if you don't look at these issues, you just fall deeper into your addiction, and that can lead into a vicious cycle. So I would encourage you to reach out to us at askfm/mindful matters. You can do that with complete anonymity. You can also send us an email at ask@mindfulmatters.org.au. Obviously, that will not be anonymous, so if you're not comfortable doing that, the other platform is there. And with that, I want to thank you, Bilal. Thank you so much. You really brought that Campbelltown experience to us today, with the story of your mate X. And I wish you all the best in your spiritual advancement.
Jazakallah. Thank you for having me on here.
No problems. You're welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you. With that, we will conclude the show. Join us in our next episode of Mindful Matters podcast. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.